Hey guys, today I'll show you a horror thriller TV series named The Rig, Season 1. Spoilers ahead, watch out and take care. The drama begins on a drilling platform somewhere in the vast ocean, where the crew of the rig are discussing when they can go home for their holiday. Suddenly, the lights above them start to flicker, and all the generators in the engine room stop working. Now, they have to rely on backup power. The employees spontaneously rush to the deck. A power outage on a drilling platform is a serious matter, as it could potentially lead to a gas leak. An older employee is horrified to see flames lighting up the neighboring drilling platform, and he also feels a slight sway in the handrails of the walkway. The captain of the rig, Magnus, also senses that something is wrong and attempts to contact a rescue ship in advance, only to find that the radio is also broken. For the moment, they can't make contact with anyone. Just then, a well on the platform suddenly erupts in fire, indicating that the oil well has self-ignited due to excessive pressure. The seasoned worker reacts quickly, rushing to the control room and noticing that the pressure in the oil well is still skyrocketing. He immediately asks Magnus if they should completely cut off the pipeline. Captain Magnus falls into deep thought. If he does this, it will completely block the passage to the mainland, causing losses that could amount to tens of thousands per minute. He watches the steadily rising pressure gauge and finally issues the order to cut off the pipeline. The old worker immediately complies. The flame burning in the pipeline surges into the sky, then gradually weakens and finally extinguishes. They've survived this crisis, but they must find the cause of the malfunction as soon as possible. After all, working on a deep-sea platform is like playing with fire. The slightest carelessness could lead to irreversible consequences. Just as everyone is preparing to retreat to the workroom, the entire platform suddenly shakes violently, as if it's about to sink into the sea. The workers grip the railings tightly. Fortunately, the violent shaking stops soon after. But before they can even breathe a sigh of relief, they witness an incredibly terrifying sight. A dense gray fog is rapidly approaching, swiftly engulfing the neighboring platform and the rescue ship. Before long, they find themselves enveloped in thick fog. Having worked at sea for many years, they've never encountered such strange fog, with visibility less than a meter. Thankfully, the electricity has been restored by this point. The executives are discussing the cause of the recent shaking, suspecting that it might have been a deep-sea earthquake. Deputy Rose, a senior geologist, says that previous surveys have shown that the geological structure of this sea area is stable and unlikely to produce earthquakes. The old worker sees through it all, suggesting that they never stop extracting resources from the earth, and this could be its trivial retaliation. Captain Magnus thinks that they contact headquarters for support as soon as possible, and they can discuss the cause of the accident later. Unfortunately, the radio is already damaged and needs to be repaired by someone. Soon, 2 repairmen were geared up and made their way to the base of the signal tower. Leading the way was a young man named Baz. Despite the fear gnawing at his heart, he trudged through the dense fog, a task that felt akin to crawling through hell. Suddenly, a seagull swooped down at him, causing Baz to shudder in fright. Luckily, the safety rope saved him from a dangerous fall. Another repairman followed suit, and Baz felt slightly reassured. Eventually, they reached the top of the signal tower. The second repairman is the radio and communications officer named Fulmer, who managed to fix the signal tower after working for a while. However, as Baz was packing up to descend, he discovered a bird lying dead on the deck for no apparent reason. Suddenly, a horrifying scene followed. Baz fell right off the top of the tower. Upon hearing the news, the platform's medical staff rushed to the deck. They checked Baz's pulse and found signs of life. He was rushed to the medical room. The primary doctor assessed his injuries. Aside from obvious spinal damage, his internal organs were severely hurt. Given the current medical resources, saving Baz seemed impossible. The only solution was to airlift him to a hospital. However, with the thick fog making flying conditions unfavorable, Baz's fate hung in the balance. Filled with guilt, Fulmer blamed himself for not taking better care of Baz. Adding to his concerns, despite the repaired communication equipment, there was no response from headquarters after numerous attempts. To make things worse, Rose discovered that not only their oil well, but all the oil wells in the entire area had been shut down. This is an unprecedented situation. The cause of all these issues was still unknown. With these troubles piling up, Magnus had no energy left to worry about the oil extraction mission. His only goal was to safely escort all employees back to the port. Hutton, an old-timer in the oil business, believed that Baz's accident was due to Magnus's poor command and argued that Baz should never have been sent to repair the communication tower. Magnus did not want to argue and left the office, but Hutton stayed and found a file on the desk. While Magnus was discussing strategies with his deputy, he heard that Hutton was stirring up trouble again. Hutton had gathered all the employees on the deck, publicly criticizing Magnus's mistakes. He accused Magnus of sending Baz to his death and ruining everyone's chance to go home. When Magnus arrived, he suppressed his anger and reprimanded Hutton for his baseless accusations. Well prepared, Hutton produced the file he had found in the office, leaving Magnus stunned. He snatched the file and with a helpless look announced to everyone that due to the continuous decline in oil prices, the governor had decided to shut down all the oil wells in this area, which meant everyone present was about to be unemployed. Magnus had originally planned to announce this news after everyone had returned to shore, but the thick fog had trapped them all here. Just then, large flakes of something started falling from the sky. At first, everyone thought it was snow, but upon closer inspection, they found it was black material like burning ash. Everyone was left stunned, staring at the sky, wondering where this substance had come from. But then, something even stranger happened. Baz, who was severely injured and at death's door, miraculously walked onto the platform, mumbling incoherently. The doctor immediately assisted Baz back to the medical room. After an examination, the doctor found that Baz's injuries had significantly improved. Deputy Rose asked Baz what had happened on the tower, but Baz couldn't remember anything. He said his mind had been filled with noise and he seemed to have seen something in the fog. Baz became more agitated as he spoke, repeatedly muttering, "It's coming!" The doctor calmed him down and asked what was coming. Baz spoke of a terrifying wave before falling asleep under the influence of a sedative. The doctor and Rose outside the door wore worried expressions. Baz's condition was incredibly irregular. His injuries couldn't possibly have healed so quickly. The other employees were also full of concerns. Now, the impending unemployment was the last thing on their minds. All they wished for was to escape from this eerie place as soon as possible. Suddenly, rhythmic lights flashed across the sea. It was a rescue ship sending a message. A mustached employee was assigned to receive the signal on the deck. The strange ash was still falling from the sky, making him incredibly tense. With the help of his sensitive mustache, he observed the frequency of the rescue ship's flashing light, recording it on his arm. Soon, the communication was translated. The rescue ship was repeatedly sending a request for support. Magnus immediately had a response sent, setting up a signal that would allow the rescue ship and the drilling platform to dock. Next, he had to consider how to get the employees back to the port. However, Deputy Rose refused outright. The platform was currently risk-free, so why evacuate the personnel? They should be thinking about resuming work as soon as possible. Magnus thought it over. The rescue ship might not be safe either. They should first understand the situation clearly. As the person in charge, Magnus had to consider all potential crises. He then found the chef, instructing him to continue preparing dinner as usual. If the situation didn't improve by tomorrow, they would have to reduce the food portions. What he didn't anticipate was that an accident would happen so soon. After replying to the rescue ship's message on the deck, the mustached man suddenly felt intense pain. He immediately went to the medical room, but unfortunately the doctor wasn't there. He had no choice but to take some disinfectant, planning to clean his dirty body thoroughly. He felt there was something wrong with the ash floating in the air. As he was getting undressed, a glob of black liquid was flung out. The mustached man became even more anxious and began frantically washing off the stains, only to start bleeding from various parts of his body. He felt weaker and weaker until his consciousness began to blur. Meanwhile, Rose had finished collecting ash samples. Even though she was a geologist, she couldn't determine the composition and cause of the ash just by looking. A geological analysis was necessary for further study. On the other side, Baz, who had been unconscious, suddenly woke up. He found that his condition had improved significantly. He removed the bandage on his hand. The wound that had been bleeding had surprisingly healed. Baz was stunned by his condition. Using the reflection from a utensil, he examined his eyes and found that the injury in his right eye had healed. However, 2 exaggerated eye circles looked particularly fierce. Baz suddenly felt another wave approaching. After a long time, he returned to normal. He became scared and just wanted to get out of this ghostly place as soon as possible. His only hope of escape was the helipad outside. Unexpectedly, he suddenly felt a severe pain in his mouth, and a tooth naturally fell out. Baz opened his eyes wide in terror, not knowing what mysterious power the eerie fog contained. As he panicked in the control room, the old employee walked in to flex his white beard. Seeing the terrified Baz, the old man tried to reassure him that once he is back in the city, the hospital will be able to cure all his ailments. Baz, however, was in a bad state. He could constantly hear strange noises and suddenly saw a vision of the old man dying horribly. Terrified, he sprinted out of the control room, leaving a spiral mark on the glass. The old man, puzzled by the mark, worried that Baz might have an accident given his current state. So he plunged into the fog with his flashlight to find him. In a corridor, he bumped into Fulmer, who was also searching for someone. It turned out that just 10 minutes prior, Hutton had challenged the authority of the boss and was locked in a room for reflection. However, after seeing the signal from the rescue ship, Hutton escaped through a window facing the sea. Fulmer suspected he was planning to escape on a lifeboat, so he started checking each one. Unfortunately, he cut his palm while closing a hatch. Despite the unknown ash still floating in the air, Fulmer disregarded it and continued his search, unaware that Hutton had already reached the control room. Hutton, however, didn't plan to escape alone. He intended to leave with all the crew members. The rescue ship nearby was their hope. Following the operation manual, he sent an emergency rescue message to the rescue ship. When the flickering signal light was discovered, everyone rushed towards the control room, but it was too late. The rescue ship had seen the signal and was speeding towards them. Magnus was livid by that. With the situation unclear, boarding the rescue ship might be even more dangerous, but Hutton insisted that staying on the platform was a sure death sentence. Without further explanation, Magnus used the broadcast system to cancel the emergency evacuation order, instructing everyone to stay inside the platform and await further instructions. Everyone was furious, questioning the farce they were being put through. The old man, however, did not obey the order and continued searching for Baz. He finally found him on the lower deck. He urged Baz to return with him, but the next moment he was stunned to see the seawater under his feet glowing blue. Baz, seemingly a different person, kept repeating, "I can see it." The old man was puzzled, asking what he saw. Baz responded, "Life that originates from water." The old man was getting anxious because the rescue ship was coming, but Baz resisted, holding on tight to the old man's clothes. Strangely, the old man started to cough up water. Just then, the rescue ship sped towards them. At the moment of impact, it made a beautiful tail swing, splashing a lot of water, then turned and sailed in another direction. The crew was perplexed, wondering if the rescue ship had abandoned them. At that moment, on the lower deck, someone had already discovered the unconscious old man, but Baz was nowhere to be found. Magnus was desperately performing CPR, but sadly, he couldn't save the old man's life. The doctor looked astonished. The cause of the old man's death was drowning, even though he hadn't even touched seawater. Magnus didn't concern himself with that. He was filled with grief. The old man was his longest-serving employee, always diligent and dedicated. Little did he expect, the old man wasn't the only person to die that night. On the platform, a waitress in the dorm cafeteria found that the mustached employee who had sent the signal to the rescue ship on the deck earlier had suddenly died in his own bathroom. His tattoos were all seeping large amounts of blood, and the doctor judged that he died from shock due to blood loss. In Baz's room, they found his fallen gold tooth. These bizarre accidents inevitably made people think of the ash in the white fog. Rose began to examine its composition, but even after observing it for a while, she found nothing special until she had a sudden idea and dripped a drop of fresh blood into the sample. To her horror, she found that a large amount of organic life was separating from the ashes and starting to attach to the blood. The ash was just their temporary carrier, like parasites. These life forms were constantly looking for new hosts, repairing damage and clearing all impurities. This explained why Baz's injuries recovered overnight and why his gold tooth fell out on its own. However, the unknown creature's transmission route couldn't be determined. Everyone was chilled by the revelation. They had never seen such strange creatures, and the greatest fear of humanity is the unknown. At this moment, Baz was sitting on the deck, looking at the glowing bodies in the seawater. The scene of the seabed collapsing flashed in his mind again. It must be the mysterious organisms transmitting information in their unique way. Perhaps a greater disaster was about to strike. The thing that concerned the other crew the most was whether they had been infected or not. Rose said that before the infection route was determined, potential infectees must be isolated. Fulmer had been exposed to the ash and his palm was injured, so he became a key observation target. All they could do now was wait quietly. Not much later, everyone's eyes lit up. After a day and night of strangeness, the dense fog was beginning to dissipate. The crew soon saw the neighboring drilling platform, but thick smoke was constantly rising from it. Clearly, it had suffered a serious accident the night before. No wonder the rescue ship had urgently turned around. They must have gone to rescue the neighboring platform. Everyone couldn't help but worry about what they had gone through and how many people had survived. But with their equipment and manpower, it was almost impossible to rescue anyone. Magnus felt it was better to take care of themselves first. He called a meeting with all the crew. Now that the fog had cleared, their task was to restore contact with headquarters as soon as possible and have them send a helicopter for rescue. But before that, they had to do a thorough cleaning of the platform to get rid of the ash left by the fog, and they also had to find Baz, who was missing. Magnus didn't want to give up on any of his crew. The hope of going home was right in front of them. Everyone's spirits lifted, and they immediately began to carry out the boss's orders. The platform's sprinkler system was activated, and large amounts of fresh water were continuously washing the ground. At this time, Baz was hiding in a corner, feeling the cool drops of water. It felt like he was back in his mother's arms. But little did he know the crew members were geared up and ordered to look for him. Although the drilling platform was built in the deep sea, its actual area was astonishingly large. Finding one person was going to be a significant challenge. Groups of employees started heading to every corner of the platform. Magnus sat in the control room, keeping an eye on the surveillance screens. Unfortunately, not every area was equipped with a camera. Despite this, Magnus was filled with concern. He felt that the recent events were too bizarre, especially the unknown ash creature. Rose tried to reassure him, suggesting that the mystery might not be so hard to explain. She said the oil they were extracting is made from ancient organisms. During the initial exploration of this sea area, they even found a fossil. The spores inside it were very similar to the ash creature. The fossil dates back to the late Permian period, about 300 million years ago. At that time, the Earth experienced a massive extinction, with 90% of terrestrial life dying out. The cause of this disaster remains a mystery. Rose speculated that they might have accidentally awakened this spore organism from the Permian era during our oil extraction. Magnus shivered at this thought. He didn't want to admit that he might be the cause of a world-ending disaster. So he turned the tables, trying to reassure Rose by saying that the ocean is the most mysterious entity on Earth, and it's normal to encounter unexplainable phenomena. He even revealed that a few years ago, 9 million tons of seaweed sprouted overnight in the Caribbean Sea, blocking all the shipping lanes and bays. That was also an unsolved mystery. But Magnus had no idea that another unexplainable, bizarre phenomenon was occurring on the drilling platform where he worked. Baz, hiding in the warehouse, waved his hand gently, causing a faint blue glow to appear on the surface of the oil. As he was pondering this strange occurrence, the warehouse door was opened. A worker named Garrow walked in. He was also looking for Baz, but quickly noticed the organisms floating on the oil. As he was about to call his companions, Baz rushed out. Not long after, 2 more workers ran in, only to find Garrow lying on the floor, wailing in pain. He claimed that Baz had attacked him, but his demeanor was somewhat odd. The workers also noticed the organisms floating on the oil. They weren't alone. Other workers looking for Baz had also spotted plants growing on the oil. Suddenly, the drilling platform started trembling again. This time, everyone was prepared and managed to stabilize themselves quickly. However, Hutton noticed something was off with Garrow. He asked him to show his palms, and to their surprise, Garrow's dentures had also fallen out. It was clear that he had been infected by the parasite. He then disappeared in a flash. When the unexplainable trembling stopped, nobody felt relieved. They were shocked at the rapid transmission ability of the unknown organism. In just a few minutes, Garrow had become a new host. After a head count, they realized that the cafeteria waitress was also missing. Someone said they had just seen her in the mud pit room. Hutton cursed under his breath and rushed after her with a flashlight. Meanwhile, the waitress was walking on the oil, which was now covered in plants. She soon encountered Baz, who was desperately searching for something. He claimed that his senses were becoming increasingly clear and that he had gained billions of years of memories. The waitress tried to persuade him not to harm their colleagues anymore. Baz reassured her that he hadn't killed the old man. Then, he cryptically stated that everything was going to die, and he had to prevent the disaster from happening. Since he was infected by the parasite, Baz can sense the end of the world is imminent. But it is still unclear whether this is just an illusion created by the mysterious creature. A large-scale collapse begins at the ocean floor, and a towering tsunami sweeps in. Baz realizes that he must figure out a way to prevent all this from happening. His companions on the side want to persuade more people to join the action, but their crazy talk scares the waitress, who keeps retreating. Suddenly, a bright light flashes. The two men are frightened and quickly hide. It turns out that the relief from the platform has arrived, and the poor waitress is finally rescued. Just as Magnus is about to breathe a sigh of relief, he finds that the flame in the stack was extinguished during the recent tremors. Its function is to burn off excess gas. If the flame goes out, it will cause condensation water to backflow and cause an explosion. Unfortunately, the automatic ignition system has failed. Now the only solution is to ignite it manually, a surefire suicide mission. Sending anyone would be inappropriate, so as the person in charge, Magnus decides to take up the task. The communications officer Fulmer suddenly says he should do it instead. According to the ignition plan, they need to use a crane to send Fulmer near the stack, then light it with a flare gun. They must keep a safe distance to ensure safety. All employees watch nervously as Magnus directs the operation. When Fulmer has covered half the distance, Magnus immediately calls for him to stop. If he gets too close, he could be burned by the intense fire. Fulmer lifts the gun and gestures. He has no confidence in hitting the target, so he unties the safety rope and steps forward again. Everyone watches nervously until he stops, less than 5 meters from the stack. He then lifts the flare gun and pulls the trigger hard. Seeing Fulmer fall and not get up, all the rescuers rush forward. Fortunately, he had rushed back a distance in time, and his protective suit absorbed most of the heat. Fulmer didn't suffer fatal injuries. The risk was worth it. He successfully ignited the stack and saved the entire platform. But this is only temporary safety. A larger crisis awaits them. Baz again senses a message from the ancient organisms. It turns out that the main pipeline to the seafloor is the root of all disasters and must be completely shut down. But his access is limited, and the two on the scene can't do it alone. Meanwhile, Fulmer's injuries have fully healed. He quickly arrives in Rose's lab, wanting to help her unlock the secrets of the ancient organisms. Rose discovers that these bacteria can communicate with each other through group sensing, perhaps the reason Baz is seeing strange hallucinations. Fulmer is also curious. These bacteria are billions of years old. How did they survive? Rose says that many bacteria fall into a strange sleep, only to be awakened many years later. Fulmer may not have noticed, but unconsciously he is drawing many circular patterns. Just then, the lab's communicator rings. It's Magnus who calls them to the control room. The pressure in the oil well's main pipeline has risen again. Surveillance shows that Baz and Garrow are still opening valves. It seems that they are trying to blow up the platform. Fulmer tries to use the remote control to shut it off, but it's impossible. Going to the control area where Baz is to stop him is unrealistic. They might follow in Garrow's footsteps and be infected by the bacteria in Baz's body. Rose proposes that they launch a submersible to the bottom of the sea and manually close the terminal valve. This can stop the pressure from rising. Meanwhile, in the control area, Baz and Garrow watch the constantly shaking main pipeline with great anxiety. They can only pray that their colleagues can dive to the sea floor in time to close the terminal valve. This turns out to be the risky plan Baz had in mind. Meanwhile, the unmanned submersible had gradually sunk to the seabed. When everyone saw the footage being transmitted back, they were all stunned. The seabed was actually emitting countless points of blue light, displaying a pattern that was the eerie circular shape. But they didn't have time to ponder the reason. The key was to close the terminal valve. The operator, finally living up to their expectations, controlled the submersible with precision to complete the task. The pressure in the main pipeline dropped instantly. Only at this point did everyone start studying the glowing circle on the seabed. The waitress, who had been in close contact with Baz, felt that his interference with the main pipeline was not meant for destruction, but for salvation. Fulmer stood still for a long time. He was too familiar with this circle, which was the same as the one he had drawn earlier. Baz, in the control area, also noticed that the main pipeline had been closed. Although the goal had been achieved, he couldn't bring himself to feel happy, because the system program might reopen the valve. Even forced destruction wouldn't work. The programming would have to be manually altered to completely block the possibility of the main pipeline opening. And the only person on the platform capable of doing this was Fulmer. The people in the control room were still discussing Baz's goal when they suddenly realized their phones had a signal. The communication network was finally restored. Magnus contacted the Coast Guard immediately, calling for help. Fulmer, on the other hand, opened his computer to look up information on the ring pattern. Many more employees were video chatting with their families. Each of them was doing what they thought was most important. But the results were not satisfactory. Just as Fulmer had found crucial information, the network was cut off again. And Magnus, who was calling for help, only heard the constant cries of despair from the other end before communication was interrupted again. The most desperate was the doctor. Her partner's coastal city was also shrouded in dense fog. The doctor had just wanted to remind her not to go out when the video call was cut off. It turned out that not only their drilling platform, but the coastal cities were also experiencing the same ordeal. At this point, most of the employees had learned of their family's unfortunate situation. What they had to worry about now was not just their own safety. The desire to get home became even more urgent. Some people suggested leaving by lifeboat, but Magnus immediately vetoed it. The coastline was too far away. They simply couldn't reach it successfully. The Coast Guard's rescue helicopter also couldn't reach them in a short time. All the people present could not just sit and wait for death, everyone venting their despair and unwillingness. Magnus was under the most pressure and had become somewhat dazed. Rose noticed that Fulmer hadn't attended the meeting. It turned out that he was examining his wounds in the bathroom at the time. He couldn't believe that in just one day, all the external injuries he had received had healed, not even leaving a scar. He was certain that he too had been infected by the ancient organisms. Rose was helpless about this and could only comfort him with a forced smile. Then she went back to the meeting room to oversee the situation. Fulmer's fear had not diminished at all because he had heard Baz's call. This was a special form of communication between ancient organisms. When Rose returned to the communications room once again, she found only a note left by Fulmer. He was planning to leave to prevent spreading the parasite to others. At that moment, Fulmer was on his way to Baz's control area. The doctor happened to see his hurried departure and quickly followed. After a quick apology, Fulmer opened the isolation door. Not wanting to lose her companion, the doctor followed without hesitation. What she saw next was truly shocking. The metal-constructed control area was completely covered with green plants. The regenerative ability of these ancient organisms was beyond imagination. Visible blue light points floated in the air. The doctor stood still, unable to move. To her surprise, the glowing organisms dispersed when they approached her abdomen, not continuing to invade. The reason was known only to the doctor herself. She was 2 months pregnant. Even though Rose managed to pull the doctor out in time, the doctor could not calm down. Clearly, these ancient organisms possessed an extremely high level of intelligence, instinctively protecting the unborn next generation. Just then, someone on the deck shouted. All the staff ran out. Over the sea, not too far away, there was a glimmer of light. Everyone's spirits lifted, thinking that the long-awaited rescue had arrived. They spontaneously put on life jackets and quickly packed their belongings. Looking at the faint light in the distance, their excitement was beyond words. They could finally leave this hellish place. But as the light approached, everyone's faces turned grim. It was not a rescue at all, but a lifeboat from the neighboring platform. Earlier in the day, something had happened there. The safety manager thought they should not accept these survivors at will, who knew whether they were infected or not. But Rose felt they were all colleagues and should not be abandoned so easily. When the lifeboat approached the platform, it was full of survivors. Rose planned to arrange for them to be quarantined for testing, but the leading man was extremely brash. He was a high-level executive from headquarters, and he blatantly ignored Rose's quarantine request, going straight to the platform's control room. He then anxiously inquired about the condition of the main pipeline. Full of curiosity, Rose wondered what had happened on the neighboring platform and why there had been a sudden accident. The leading man made light of the situation, attributing it to a pressure failure that caused a huge explosion, killing everyone else, as if this incident was just a trivial matter. Rose, however, felt that things were not that simple and were likely related to the ancient organisms. So she began researching the mysterious circular pattern again. The doctor thought it looked like tree rings. Rose was suddenly enlightened. The space between the inner 4 rings coincided exactly with the periods of mass extinction in Earth's history. This might be a unique way for ancient organisms to record events. According to the timeline, the last unclosed ring corresponded to their current era. In other words, a new mass extinction era was about to arrive. She deduced that this was a warning issued by the ancient organisms to humans. Now, the Earth is on the verge of a 5th mass extinction. Some of the crew, infected by ancient organisms, are the first to sense the impending crisis. The key to the issue is the drilling platform's main undersea pipeline. It must be completely shut down for there to be a glimmer of hope. Fulmer, although not understanding how this relates to the world's demise, decides to give it a shot. Using the control system, he permanently closes the pipeline valve. The survivor from the neighboring platform may know something more of the explosion. He says that after Coke, a senior executive from headquarters, arrived on the platform, he first seized command from the person in charge, then used the main pipeline to forcefully inject something into the seabed, claiming it was for some kind of testing. As a result, the platform suddenly exploded. Everyone was stunned after hearing this and wanted to ask for more details, but the survivor seemed wary and didn't reveal more information. After a full-body examination, the doctor confirmed that he was not infected. From now on, he just needed to rest. Captain Magnus was suspicious and asked the doctor to look up Coke's specific information on the intranet. He always felt that the man's purpose for coming here was not simple. Surprisingly, Coke was not found in the company's list. In such a case, he either assumed a false identity or he held extremely high authority. Magnus had too many recent worries and no energy to play detective, so he confronted Coke directly, asking why the neighboring platform exploded and what he wanted to do here. Coke said he was conducting a secret experiment for the company that, if successful, would significantly enhance the quality and extraction of oil. He would continue the operation left incomplete on the neighboring platform here. Magnus was upset. This was his turf, but Coke simply ignored him. Magnus was shaking with rage, sensing a huge crisis. This Coke was definitely up to something. Rose guessed that his experiment might be related to the ancient organisms in the seabed. If only Fulmer was here, he could communicate with the ancient beings because he was infected, and thus get to the truth. Baz, although also infected, was unwilling to trust anyone and not good at expressing his thoughts. Just as they were discussing how to get Fulmer back, Coke had already begun his plan of chaos. He used his identity as the senior executive from headquarters to secretly enlist a group, including Hutton, the safety manager, and the chef. He said the company was conducting a secret experiment that, if successful, would prevent the oil field from closing, and everyone present could keep their jobs. This was a deadly temptation for those about to be laid off, so they decided to side with Coke. Then Coke revealed his plan. The key to the experiment was to open the main pipeline, but the pump control was occupied by Baz, Fulmer, and others. They had to be cleared out first. The company had stored enough experimental gas, mainly carbon dioxide, on each drilling platform. If it was injected into the pump control's fire system, it could make Baz and others unconscious. This was the most effective way to take over the pump control. The group agreed and immediately prepared to act in protective gear. Coke had unusually high authority. He could even open the containers that even Magnus was helpless against, storing many unknown gases. Although the old hands like Hutton didn't know what it was, they still followed Coke's orders. They stealthily came to the pump control where Baz was located and injected the mysterious gas into the fire pipeline. When the fire system was activated, Coke, who was in the control room, looked around. All he had to do was close the isolation door of the pump control at the right time, ensuring that the people inside couldn't escape. Deep in the corridor, Fulmer and others were still attempting to shut down the main pipeline, but this required high operational permissions. Fulmer felt helpless. He tried to sever the hardware, only to have it backfire. The pipeline actually opened on its own. Presumably at the time of the platform's design, there was a strong effort to prevent the main pipeline from being completely closed, as this would cause immeasurable losses for the company. Just then, Baz sensed someone entering the control area. Garrow quickly got up to check the entrance, while Baz kept encouraging Fulmer. Only by closing the main pipeline could the ancient organisms be spared from attack, increasing their friendliness towards humans. If they provoked the creatures, it would bring about a cataclysmic disaster for humanity. The destruction of the neighboring platform was a clear example. They used the experiment as an excuse to pump unknown gases into the seabed via the main pipeline, which resulted in a strong backlash from the ancient organisms and ultimately led to the explosion of the neighboring platform. So, what was the function of this gas? Hutton and a few others quickly provided an answer. After they connected the unknown gas to the fire pipeline and then activated the fire switch, a large amount of unknown gas was sprayed out. Fulmer sensed that something was wrong and hurried towards the door. Garrow had earlier discovered Hutton and was about to reprimand them when he suddenly felt immense pain and collapsed on the spot. The safety manager realized that the gas provided by Coke was not carbon dioxide, but a deadly, toxic gas. He shouted out loud, urging Fulmer, Baz, and others to leave as soon as possible. Hutton and the chef directly escaped from the pump control area. Coke, watching the progress via surveillance, saw his mission had been accomplished and immediately closed the isolation door. The safety manager, who was a step too late, was locked inside. Hutton regretted his actions deeply. He hadn't expected Coke to be so ruthless, even willing to sacrifice his own men to eliminate Baz and others, but he had underestimated Coke's ambition, whose real goal was to wipe out all the ancient organisms in the control area, and the unknown gas was the perfect weapon to do so. Baz noticed the green plants in the corridor wilting at a visible rate, and subsequently, he too collapsed on the spot. Fulmer, after a struggle, managed to reach the control box for the fire system, but without the key, he couldn't shut it off. In the end, he too collapsed helplessly. Coke was overjoyed in the control room. He had finally completed the first step of his plan. Unexpectedly, the doctor rushed in. Upon seeing the scene on the surveillance, she realized that Coke was up to no good and immediately summoned Magnus and others. Coke explained that only by exterminating all the ancient organisms could the human crisis be completely averted. Rose, on the contrary, believed that the ancient organisms had survived for hundreds of millions of years, and trying to exterminate them was a fool's dream. Magnus didn't intend to argue, and instead prioritized getting the people out. Unfortunately, he couldn't remotely shut down the fire system either. He had to go to the pump control and manually shut it down. The only thing Magnus could do was open the isolation door. Rose was worried about the safety of Fulmer and others, so she took Hutton's oxygen cylinder and rushed into the control filled with poisonous gas. The first sight she saw was the now dead safety manager, who was sadly just a door away from being rescued. Rose looked in astonishment at the wilted plants. The effects of the unknown poisonous gas were indeed powerful. She advanced down the corridor where she found Fulmer collapsed. First, she manually shut down the fire system to prevent the toxic gas from spreading further. Then she handed an oxygen mask to Fulmer, hoping he would quickly regain consciousness. When she saw no significant effect, she could only try to carry him out of the control area. Unexpectedly, faint blue lights began to drift from the withered plants. It turned out that the ancient life forms were not entirely dead, their vitality exceeding expectations. The corridor was once again filled with the blue lights, and Fulmer, who had been infected by the ancient organisms, also began to wake up. Rose was overjoyed and quickly helped him out. Baz, the original infected, also woke up at this moment. Poor Garrow, being a side character, did not get to enjoy the rejuvenation. The accident resulted in the death of 2 crew members, and Hutton was filled with guilt. He regretted heeding Coke's bewitchment. He now realized what was touted as an experiment to increase oil output was clearly an extermination campaign against ancient organisms. Magnus did not blame him. The 2 employees were not killed by Hutton, but by Coke. Instead of wallowing in self-blame, it would be better to stand up and retaliate. Later, in the corridor, Magnus encountered Rose and Fulmer, who had just escaped danger. They all agreed that they had to strip Coke of his command. Otherwise, all the platform's crew would die because of him. So Coke was quickly locked in a separate compartment. Magnus demanded he disclose everything about the ancient organisms. Even if he wouldn't, the other survivors from the neighboring platform could provide a lot of information. Coke looked serious now. He was actually executing a secret order from headquarters to save all human life. At the same time, the infected Baz painfully watched his recently deceased companion full of worries. Coke's absurd behavior had thoroughly enraged the ancient organisms. Even Baz was now rejected by the ancient organisms and completely cut off from them. It wouldn't be long before the real counterattack of the ancient organisms began. Initially, they were neutral, trying to establish contact with humans, the most potent species on Earth, to seek a way to coexist. But Coke, representing the oil company's interests, tried several times to destroy them. However, they didn't anticipate the extreme resilience of these creatures, which began to multiply instantly and launched a fierce counterattack. As a result, the pressure in the main pipeline increased exponentially, and the entire drilling platform turned into a sea of fire. Coke confessed everything without acknowledging their wrongdoings. Instead, he blamed the ancient organisms for contaminating the oil and also inhabiting human bodies. If they couldn't be eradicated at the budding stage, once they grew, they could potentially cause the extinction of the human race. Captain Magnus realized that it was their over-extraction that unintentionally awakened these ancient organisms. However, he unknowingly agreed with Coke's extreme actions. But in the next moment, Magnus changed his attitude because the survivors who escaped with Coke revealed many details of the disaster. They could have escaped with more people, but Coke, only concerned with his own safety, jumped into the lifeboat and ordered it to be launched. There were still more than 20 empty seats in the cabin at that time, which sent a chill down Magnus's spine. Given Coke's style, the employees on his platform could become sacrificial lambs at any moment. Deputy Rose thought Coke's approach was too extreme. The reproduction ability of the ancient organisms was astonishing, and they possessed a high level of intelligence. Humans should coexist peacefully with them, not stand on opposing sides in a life-and-death struggle. Now, the key lies with Fulmer, who has been infected. At Rose's request, he began trying to establish contact with the ancient organisms, hoping to express a desire for peace. However, what Fulmer sensed was that the ancient organisms were about to trigger a massive underwater landslide. The resulting tsunami could submerge the entire coastal city. This is their attitude now. Because of Coke's continuous attacks, the ancient organisms will launch a mad revenge on humans. Baz felt the dire situation, but he had lost contact with the ancient organisms. He knew everything was over. At that moment, the cracks at the bottom of the ocean began to spread rapidly, and the drilling platform started shaking violently. Luckily, the terrifying shaking soon disappeared, but Magnus felt this was the prelude to the ancient organism's revenge. Now all the crew are hanging by a thread. Magnus was suddenly thrown into a panic. At this point, he couldn't take Rose's advice for peace. He decided to find Coke to hear his plan. After learning of Magnus's concerns, Coke stated that as long as Magnus agreed to use the main pipeline to wipe out the ancient organisms, he could guarantee the safety of the crew because he had already arranged for a rescue helicopter in advance. When Magnus announced this news, he was strongly opposed by most of his men, who believed that this would undoubtedly provoke the ancient organisms again. Even if everyone escaped by plane, they could not prevent the fate of human extinction. Magnus forcefully argued a few points, wondering what if Coke killed the ancient organisms. But Fulmer said that their regenerative ability is extremely strong. A single oil rig cannot resist them. Rose added that the ancient organisms might be spread across the entire ocean. Even if the platform area was cleared, it would be of no avail. She felt the only way out was to try to negotiate peace with them. Coke suddenly interjected, saying that throughout the entire history of Earth's development, when two advanced intelligent species encounter each other, one always destroys the other. But Rose accused him of talking nonsense. There are many examples of different species cooperating and achieving win-win situations. Coke seemed a bit furious and announced that Rose was fired. Magnus immediately told Coke to shut up. Rose then suggested that Magnus find Baz. He was the first generation of infectees and might be able to dissipate the hostility of the ancient organisms. After thinking for a long time, Magnus remembered that Baz was also his employee. Even if he couldn't successfully negotiate, at least he could rescue him. But the doctor started to back out. She didn't believe the ancient organisms would be so easy to talk to. Besides, what she wanted most at this time was to hurry home and reunite with her family. Magnus understood her thoughts and decided to set off with Rose and Fulmer. Before leaving, he reminded Hutton to keep an eye on Coke and prevent him from taking any extreme actions. The party of three quickly arrived at the pump control, where they saw a corpse with eyes wide open in death, surrounded by dense vegetation. Magnus sorrowfully adjusted the body's position, vowing that he would not let any more of his crew members die. As the group moved forward through the hallway, they were surprised to find that the plants had grown waist-high. Baz was staring blankly at a speck of light. Magnus told him that they would protect the ancient organisms from any further attacks. However, Baz was in tears. It was too late. They had always refused to communicate with him, and he collapsed to the ground in despair. Meanwhile, Coke was up to his tricks again. He found the survivor who had escaped with him from the neighboring platform and promised to lead everyone to safety, but only if he did something for him. The young man was sensible enough to drop what he was doing and follow Coke to the main control room. After dismissing irrelevant staff, Coke decided to reopen the main pipeline and continue pumping deadly gas into the seabed in an attempt to eradicate the accursed ancient organisms. The young man knew that the adjacent platform had been destroyed because of this. He asked if they shouldn't warn the workers to evacuate first, but Coke said it was already too late. They'd given up their chance. Though the man was unwilling to defy orders, he discreetly switched on the platform's intercom. The conversation between the two was broadcasted live, with the young man deliberately provoking Coke into revealing his dark intentions. Even if the platform exploded and everyone died, Coke would be fine. Coke said that the rescue helicopter was already on its way, and now was the perfect time to risk everything against the ancient organisms. Hearing this, the other employees were shocked and rushed towards the control room. At that moment, another wave of violent shaking came from the seabed. The entire platform was teetering on the verge of collapse, the tremors more severe than before. Coke knew the ancient organisms were launching their final counterattack and immediately activated the pipeline's transmission system. As the doctor and others arrived, they heard the rescue helicopter's call for landing. Coke had timed it perfectly. After dropping a harsh line, he ran towards the helipad. The others didn't pursue him, but instead shut down the pipeline. When Coke saw the landing helicopter, a smug smile spread across his face. However, he had not expected Hutton, who had been waiting for him for a long time. Hutton accused him of making a mess of the platform and wanting to leave alone, but Coke quickly changed his tune, saying, "2 helicopters are enough to evacuate everyone. If he dies, none of them will get away." Hutton backed down upon hearing that. Ensuring the safety of his colleagues was the priority. He started calling for the crew to prepare for boarding while keeping a close eye on Coke to prevent any further tricks. Finally, the hope of escape arrived. The crew was overjoyed as they sprinted towards the helipad. The chef counted the people present and realized that Magnus, Fulmer, and a few others were not among them. They were still in the control area. Faced with the increasingly intense blue light points, Rose wanted to try again. Baz also felt they couldn't give up so easily. This might be the last chance to save the world. Rose stepped forward, trying to blend into the ancient organisms, but the light points deliberately avoided her and regrouped not far away, forming a complete circle. They deduced that this was the symbol of the 5th mass extinction. Clearly, the ancient organisms gave up on peace with humans. Simultaneously, the outermost ring at the ocean floor also completely closed. Cracks spread rapidly through the mountainside, and an unprecedented undersea landslide began. The platform was hit hard again. Magnus and the others knew that any hope of negotiation was now lost. They decided to leave first. As they approached the exit, Baz suddenly stopped. He realized the ancient organisms had cultivated plants to nourish themselves, creating a symbiotic relationship. Baz, too, was a life given by the ancient organisms. He felt that even in death, he should return his body to them. Perhaps they could feel the kindness of humans and abandon their intention to counterattack. Magnus looked at Baz with respect and, without further persuasion, turned and left. At this time, the other crew members had already left by helicopter. Hutton and a few others were still anxiously waiting. Finally, they saw the figures of Magnus and the others. However, the next moment, a gigantic wave formed on the horizon. Everyone watched in horror. A super tsunami was coming. Magnus and the others hurriedly boarded the helicopter and successfully took off before the wave hit. Baz, who was still in the control area, walked towards the congregation of light points. His body gradually blended into the light. The next moment, the entire platform was swallowed by the immense wave. When it reappeared, it was reduced to ruins. On the plain, the faces of Magnus and the others were filled with horror, because this was just the beginning. The massive tsunami was heading towards the coast. The doctor, worried for her family, urged the pilot to speed up, but Coke suddenly said the helicopter wasn't taking them home. At first, the others didn't understand what he meant, but when they saw the towering wave, they all showed expressions of despair. In a coastal city apartment, the doctor's partner suddenly felt a slight tremor. She looked out, only to find a massive tsunami was coming. From then on, the people on the plane no longer had a home. With that, the season of this drama concludes. This is Daniel CC Movie Channel. Stay safe and enjoy your day.